And now, again, thank you, Rubina. Now I want to bring out Kenny Leon, Vice President, Canadian Construction Association, there he is, to come on and start the session, Building and Maintaining Your Culture of Inclusion. Welcome, everyone. And Kenny, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Rubina, as well, for setting the stage for us actually on that. So we are continuing on that, what Rubina said actually on building an inclusive culture. Today's panel discussion is all about establishing that culture of inclusivity, whether it's your company, whether it's at the job site itself, at your head office, at the client, or if you may, even at the Canadian Construction Association or for an association that you belong to. Uh, it's a meeting cross of this great country of ours, and its inclusivity that actually matters, especially in this era where we are actually having a shortage of workers in the industry as well. So creating that welcoming atmosphere where everyone, regardless of race, religion, gender, or any, for that matter, any other things that make us unique, is not something that we can afford to assume is going to happen automatically. We need a set of company expectations to take this forward. We need to communicate those expectations. And we also need to be ready to enforce the rules of our roads if we are going to be viewed as progressive employers who value all workers. To help us develop and enhance some of the tools employers can actually are already using and some practical advice as well, we have brought together several leaders from some of Canada's leading companies and organizations. Please join me in welcoming our panelists for today. We have Brandi Ferenc, who is the founder of Fairtrade's Toolbox. She's a Red Seal journey person, teaches HVAC, and works as a mentor for women and apprentices in the skilled trades. We got Graeme Aitken, is the executive director with the Electrical Construction Association of Ontario, who is deeply committed to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion within the electrical industry. We have Luanne Whitecrow, who is the director of the Progressive Aboriginal Relations Program with the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Businesses. And last but not least, we have Maraika, who is the director of corporate services at Maven Consulting Limited, a professional consultancy delivering engineering, construction, and project services across Western North America. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us. Awesome. I'll just begin with the question, of course, just jump right in so that we can actually have time to answer many questions as possible. Corporate culture has always existed, but more and more it seems to be a critical element in attracting and perhaps more importantly, retaining good people. And going back to Rubina's comment, she made an interesting comment saying, if you don't feel fit, you would want to look at outside. So, which all comes into building that culture. To get all that started, let's define in terms of, just to set the baseline, what culture actually means, or what actually, more specifically, what does an inclusive culture actually mean to whether it's in the trades or the office itself. So maybe we can go around the panel and get a short definition to begin with that can explain the basis for the session, and then we can start from there. So maybe I'll start with on alphabetical order. Maybe I'll actually start with Brandi. Brandi?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kenny. To me, I'm going to put this in very skilled trades lingo. To me, an inclusive culture doesn't mean everyone is given a pair of work boots. It means everyone gets a pair of work boots that fit and the ones that they want. To me, that's inclusivity. And especially in this trying times, as we've already mentioned, the labor shortage, it's so critical for employers and industry leaders to try to shift that mindset, as Rubina was talking about earlier, and to ensure that everyone feels included and like they belong. Thank you.
Graeme?
Thank you, Kenny. Thank you, Anthony, my fellow panelists, and most importantly, the people that are on here. I'm really excited about this, and I gave this question, Kenny, a great deal of thought, and quite a number of ideas came through, but the overpowering thought was that I should reach out to my team and include them in defining the term. So I did that. But you know, I think we could all talk for an entire panel on what that definition is. But let me just say that the common elements in the definitions included understanding and supporting everyone, not just being invited to the party, but being asked to dance, feeling valued and respected, empowerment, acceptance, and most importantly, it's seen from my team's view, and I agree with this, acceptance and integration of diverse points of view, experiences, and strategies.
Perfect. That's a good one. And I'm glad that you went and asked your team as well to be inclusive, Graeme. Luanne, what's your insight on the definition of an inclusive culture?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to the session today. Very grateful to be here and very grateful to be part of this conversation. Definition of inclusion of an inclusive culture. I think it's all about creating an environment where there's a safe space for your groups or your employees to participate safely. They feel safe to provide input. There's a level of mutual respect, acceptance. They're unified in their diversity, right? And I think also acknowledging the various backgrounds, right? So we're creating a safe space within that environment to be who we are, and regardless of our background, our history, religions, all of those other components that we are coming into our environment with. Yeah, so all about creating a safe space for those to be who they are. Very simple.
Perfect. Thank you, Luanne. Maraika.
Over to me. Well, first, I just want to be excited to be here today. I think DEI gets better through all of us learning from each other. And so it's great that we're here to have this conversation. For me, it's allowing each person to not just be in the workplace, but to shine. So it's bringing their strengths and creating a space where their strengths can come out and contribute to the organization. And it doesn't matter what their differences are, it doesn't matter what their strengths are, but it's able to come out and shine, and that they're valued for that too. So they're valued for those strengths being in that workplace. So that's what it is for me.
Perfect. Thank you, Maraika, and thank you everybody for your insight. Like Graeme mentioned, of course, it's just not inviting people to the party, but also asking them to dance as well. But also in terms of looking at having that inclusivity consciously as well. So thank you for establishing that baseline actually. Now let's take a look at of the company itself, how can they actually get there now that we have defined it, or perhaps even improve upon the culture that we are nurturing. I've always been a firm believer, unless of course you are consciously aware of it, sometimes it's hard to change, sometimes it's actually being. And even from Rubina's slides earlier, of course, having that, they never defined in terms from a cultural perspective of having inclusivity, but they actually had the openness and optimism, especially the word openness. That's quite big as well. So coming to you, what are some of the best practices or key components that go into building? And culture takes a long time to build, of course, right? Often it starts with the leadership as well, but then you still want to have that everybody following what's actually needed from them actually to support. So it's just having a committee enough? I know I've seen this as well, just having a committee. Or just to talk about leadership planning. So why don't we just see what it actually takes from your perspective as well? And please feel free to join in as well. So I'll start with Maraika on this question.
Yeah, it's a fabulous question. And why I love it is because I always think organizations, they're people, right? They're people producing something. And so we've got to create the culture and build that culture so they can do that. The biggest thing I always say, and it's true with DEI, it's true with safety, it's true with how we use processes, is if it's not lived, it doesn't exist. And so being lived are those shared behaviors, those values that we see from co-op students all the way to your CEO. So I really think it comes forward with shared behaviors. The question is, how do you create those shared behaviors together, right? That's what building the culture is from. And there's many, many ways to do that. One of the ways I think we've heard about bringing diverse voices out and making sure we're listening to them. And the biggest way to do that is engaging them, knowing that everybody wants to be engaged in a different way. Right now, I'm a mentor for a program for young adults. And one thing I love about this program is it's people across Canada, even into the US, different backgrounds, different neurodiversity, and so on within it. And they're really, really good at engaging every single person in different formats. And they do that through taking pauses, asking questions, having surveys, allowing people to type in the chat or speak up, whatever kind of works for them. And that really allows those diverse voices to come out. So I think within a company, it's finding that way to allow those voices to come. And the last thing I think is the self-awareness, which Rubina kind of chatted about earlier. I think that's really, really true. It's self-awareness as an individual. How do you learn best? You know, what works for you, what doesn't? So you can communicate that with your team. But it's also as a leader, taking that awareness of what biases you have, or how your leadership style might work for your team or might not work for your team, and being honest with the weaknesses and strengths so you can kind of work on that together. So those are my two things, really, is bringing out diverse voices and the self-awareness.
Thank you, Maraika. Luanne, maybe you would want to add something to that as well.
Sure. Hi. Yeah. I think also, so my name is Luanne Whitecrow, and I run a program called the Progressive Aboriginal Relations Program at the CCAB. And one of the things that has been helpful, and we've heard even from diversity groups that are part of this, the Progressive Aboriginal Relations Program, is that it's critical to, when you're looking at creating a cultural shift inside an organization, it's really good to set that, and I've heard it from diversity groups as well, setting out that policy commitment, that strategy, along with the work plans to set up a structure, a framework for diversity, for example, for the long term, right? So for long-term commitment, here's what we're going to do with our policy strategy, our commitment, along with our work plan, and we're going to check in every now and then on our results, right? So this is something that has been critical with the program that we run at CCAB called the PAR program, is setting up for long-term success. So as some of the questions were asked, is a committee just enough? No, it's all about getting that executive leadership buy-in, really reflecting on the intent around developing an inclusive culture for the long term, right? So when you get that buy-in from the executive leadership to talk about what do we want to do in the next 20 to 50 years around diversity, how do we increase that in order to have good retention, upward mobility with good results? So it's more about the methodology, I think, that will make a diversity framework more sustainable for the long term. And that's what we've learned in the program that we run, as we help companies build out that framework to set them up for long-term success as it relates to their targets that they're setting, as it relates to the input that they receive from the employees inside the organization, from the stakeholders, rights holders, anyone that they're doing business with. They can apply that to any partnership moving forward, starting from the inside of the organization. So about resetting our thinking and process approach in the very early years by reflecting, right, starting out there, and then building from there on the mission, vision, and focus of that framework, right? Yeah, just a little bit of input around that process.
Perfect. Because I see the word, I want to come to Graeme as well to add, because I see diversity and inclusion advisory committee there actually, because we spoke about just not having that committee is not enough. So maybe Graeme, you can actually add some insight in terms from your experience point of view as well, especially working for an association. You come across quite a lot of organizations as well. So Graeme, over to you.
I absolutely agree with Luanne that a committee is not enough, unless you simply want to check a box. If you simply want to check a box, just have a committee. There's another issue I have with committees, and committees are by their nature exclusive. And so I think if you have a committee around DEI, that you should rotate that committee and ensure that you're going to have a dynamic organization, that you rotate people through that, so you're getting the diverse viewpoints and experiences on that diverse committee. And then the other thing on the question, Kenny, that I'm just not certain about, and I'm hoping to learn as this panel and the other panels continue. I'm not sure I like the idea of best practices, because best practices got us to where we are.
Perfect. Thank you, Graeme. Actually, I echo this as well. Just having a committee is not going to work. And I've seen this many often as well, just for a tick box. Most organizations have a diversity in a DEI committee, but the culture doesn't change. It still remains the same. Talking of which, of course, management and executive leadership actually play a critical role of being champions of change or having that inclusive culture as well. It's just fine. Sometimes, yes, you can have the committee. Even the leadership can actually be attuned to saying for the norm of being inclusive, but you really want to create that organization where everybody's embracing of being truly having that inclusivity. So having all of them, all the employees be engaged and participate is actually critical to create that culture itself. So question is, what can managers actually do to actually foster a positive and a welcoming environment, and what can they actually do or should they not do when they're faced with resistance or negative comments about progressive policies? Now, Rubina actually touched of being unbiased as one, because we all have our own biases as well, which is as a hindrance, of course, for inclusivity. But practical advice in terms of what can actually be done. Maybe I'll start with Luanne there.
Yeah, I think so. Again, it's all about providing feedback for continuous focus and improvement over a period of time, which is why I emphasize that framework is critical in helping set up the application of a structure to drive the work of diversity inside the organization to help reset that thinking and process approach early on. So as I heard earlier around rotating those committees for creating a collective inclusion process, right? That is going to create a more diverse, a collective mission, vision, and focus for the organization, and that improves the health of the company in terms of their inclusivity practices, right? First of all, and then also providing creating an employee feedback survey on that process, right? To say what can we improve on for continuous focus and improvement. That input is going to create a culture of inclusivity with the Indigenous employees that they're seen, heard, felt, and acknowledged. Managers will be part of cascading that policy and commitment towards the staff as well, and then and their feedback as well. So I think it just creates an overall healthier environment for everyone to participate in that input. The more I'm sought with for input, the more I'm going to want to be part of that process as an employee of an organization. Right? I think that's critical for that. And then also demonstrated commitment and involvement as well, right? That shows that there is at the executive leadership level to mid-level management to your staff, that there is participation, a collective participation happening where it's not just one person inside the organization running the commitment, it's the full collective group.
Perfect. Brandi, would you want to add anything to that?
No, I think I'm good on that one. Thank you.
Okay. Maraika, maybe we'll go to you.
Yeah, definitely. I really think this comes down to just great management. And I don't always think we spend enough time focused on what does great management look like. I'm going to say that because part of managing corporate services is managing HR. And HR has a term that people sometimes don't like, but I actually think it's there for a reason, which is to create fair processes. And so managing people in a fair way, that's really what it's about. Creating that positive, welcoming environment is through positive reinforcement when people do good work. It's through respect and patience. And I often hear from newcomers to Canada that it's patience in the workplace while you're learning new skills that's really important. It's providing feedback in a way that's approachable and a conversation that's really creates good management as well. But being a good manager also means knowing a little bit about diversity and inclusion yourself. And so taking a course on it or engaging your network on conversations around it. Right now, I'm in a women's leadership coaching program, and we had a session on inclusivity. And we learned about something I've never been exposed to. It's called the power and privilege wheel. And I've found myself since then thinking about that every single week. Because I realized I actually have a bunch of privileges. I grew up in a middle-income family. I'm fit and I'm healthy and I'm white, and all those things go into me having a lot of privileges, even though my gender norm might say I'm not what you normally find in construction. So I think doing your best to learn as a manager as well creates that. And the last I would say is you're going to get resistance, you're going to get negative comments, and how you deal with that is how you create inclusivity. You want to welcome it because you want to allow people to bring their voice out. And it's a delicate balance because you also want to reinforce what you want to create for inclusivity and show what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And if it's really clear what isn't acceptable in your workplace for inclusivity, you can kind of shut that down and make sure it's shared that this is not allowed here. So those are my thoughts around some good management practices for this.
Perfect. And if I hear right, some instances you would want to be continuous training, if at all, just to reinforce the message over and over again, because we all fall into the trap of being biased as well, but also not being attuned because of that, of not being inclusive. Maybe I'll turn this question slightly to Graeme as well in terms of saying this is good for large organizations. They have, a HR, standard programs and stuff like that. But particularly in this industry, of course, we see a lot of small and medium-sized companies, and sometimes they don't necessarily have that HR team or HR person to actually be the champion, or for that matter, even have the time to saying, here's the programs that could be due. Graeme, because there is lots of associations lots of members within the association who belong to small and medium-sized companies. Any advice on that?
Yeah, we have roughly 550 member contractors, and I would suggest that at least 40% of those are small, and if you include medium, we're probably up to 75 to 80% of our contractors are small or medium. And so I think the big piece of advice, and we've done a couple of programs, I think it's approach with a lens of learning. You want to understand, you don't want to judge, you don't want to put down, but as Maraika said, there's a balance, right? Something is clearly unacceptable. It has to be clear that that is unacceptable. And the thing that surprises me the most is when we talk about how companies or management should look at these types of things, you talk about a bigger diverse pool of talent, you talk about fostering creative, the business case has been unequivocally made. And so when that business case has been made in such a clear fashion with nothing opposed to it, then I think you start to adopt and you realize that, again, I return to looking at it with a lens of learning.
Thank you, Graeme, for adding that comments on as well. Talk to us about affinity groups and allies, because that's important to creating that culture as well. How critical is to have peers who are willing to both set up to support each other, or when a situation actually happens on a job site, how that support actually, or the ally or the groups itself. Brandi, maybe you can add some insight to us on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Kenny. Personally, this really hits home for me. If it wasn't for, 20 years ago, we didn't have social media. And with my affinity group was one other woman that was working in the trades. And without that, I probably wouldn't be sitting here on that panel today with you. I remember a phone call I made to her was myself at my first day on a construction site, and there was 300 guys on this site, and I was the only female. So I think it's absolutely critical to have these affinity groups to help get people, past those barriers, help support them through those little bumps in the road, because it's going to happen. And for employers, it's really important if you organize these groups within your organization, you're providing a platform where these underrepresented groups, they can connect, they can share and support each other, but also they can help bring awareness to leadership, possibly about maybe those unconscious biases that otherwise they won't really know about, and as far as the allies go, I'm kind of been learning most recently that I almost want to say our allies are almost more important than those affinity groups. If we really are serious about making, those numbers change. I represent less than 0.4% of my industry, and that needle hasn't moved in 20 years. So when we talk about the allies, I think that's one of the most important things out there. Most recently, I spoke to a young woman. I mentor women in all trades, regardless, because we all have that same unique experience. A young woman in her early 20s that was inappropriately touched in a mechanic shop by a male coworker. And what struck her the most was that it wasn't that this man touched her in that way. It was that there were 5 other guys there that saw it happen. And when she turned back, they all just looked at her and then turned and went back to work. And I think to myself, what if just one of them had said, that's not okay? Or had even taken a further step to go to management, maybe not knowing exactly what to do, but just bringing awareness to management that this happened. As Rubina brought up, that would be a way we could break that conformity bias, right? That's people just wanting to fit in and they don't want to say anything. So when I hear these stories, these are things happening right now today in 2024. So, allied groups are one thing, affinity groups are one thing, but I truly believe that it's our allies in the field, they can make the difference. And whether that happens to be, for myself, it's all men, right? I haven't been to school with another female or worked with another female alongside myself. So, I have a few good people I've met through the years, but unfortunately, 99% of the time, they're going to stick with the status quo because they don't want to be called out, right? So it is critical for us actually making those numbers move, and that needle's got to go up, right? Without more representation, without more women in the field, we're never going to make any progress here. And the statistics don't lie. About 2.4% of construction apprentices are female for construction trades. And of that 2.4%, only 0.7% is expected to make it to journey person status. I mean, that in itself is heart-wrenching to me, right? So I really can't stress enough, if you have an organization and you don't already have some type of, an affinity group, please, look to having those groups made, and, choose to be an ally. I think that's the way of the future, right? It's time to get on board. And we're not there to make friends. We should be there to treat each other with the same professional respect. So who cares what somebody else thinks about you? It doesn't matter, right? Do the right thing. Most people out there, I know they've got a daughter, a wife, they've got some people in their lives that could be, from an underrepresented group. Put yourself in that individual's shoes. How would you feel if that 21-year-old woman was your daughter and someone did that to her on a job site? You'd hope that one of your friends would have said something.
Anybody else wants to add anything to that? Or it's interesting, something that you mentioned, Brandi, is in terms to saying, and I'm sure most of you have heard the term bystander intervention as well. So I think it's important you are not just necessarily a bystander, especially in this creating this inclusive culture as well. You want to be speaking out. You would want to raise it out as well. It's not just because going back, it's not just if you're quiet, it's just reinforcing behavior over again. So you would probably want to change of being talking out as well. Which brings me to the next question. Of course, as we all know, this industry faces quite a critical task of actually having a labor force shortage itself. And I think we do have some speakers coming up, especially from Billforce, who's going to give some numbers later on. But that also is something, as much as attraction is a problem for this industry, retention is also a big challenge as well to keeping people within the industry. So it all reflects, in terms of someone in the industry, often reflects what a worker who is new to the sector experienced in the first few weeks and months on the job, especially if you're actually inviting newcomers to join as well. So what do new workers often face? What can companies actually do, organizations can actually do to reduce the negative first or early impressions, especially as well, Brandi, to your point, especially women coming on, which we want to attract more women to the industry as well. Maybe Brandi, I'll start with you again on this one.
Yeah, thanks. I think first and foremost, when I go back to some of my early days, even a few years ago, I was the first woman to join the facilities maintenance team. Something so simple was they didn't have a uniform for me. So they did make a woman's uniform. However, it took almost 4 months for that uniform to come in, at which time I had to wear a men's uniform. So to say, I mean, I already stood out as the only female. I was uncomfortable at work. We have a full FR uniform. So I was wearing a medium shirt was all we could get. I'm about 5'2", so that shirt came down to my knees. that all had to be tucked inside my pants. And it's a safety hazard, right? So, you know, if you're serious about it, I think one of the best things you can do is let's get started off on the right foot on day one. You're prepared, right? Even if you're thinking of hiring women, we all come in different shapes and sizes. Most uniforms can be delivered in the same colors and style so that you have a uniform that fits. You have PPE for that individual. I can't tell you how many times I love it at safety meetings when they'd pass out the gloves and they would say, oh, Brandi, well, you can just go to the wholesaler because we didn't bother to get you a bag of size 7 or 8 gloves, right? All the gloves are extra large or large. So once again, I'm being isolated, right? I'm different, I get it. But let's just say, let's start off in the right foot. Things as simple as, you know, having proper uniforms that fit, having that PPE. As a female, if your company requires someone to wear a harness, I actually have a different harness than a man. I wear a crossbody harness. That's what is safe for me to wear, not your traditional harness with the lines that go across, right? All of these things, like the smallest things that we take for granted, as someone who's in the trenches, I can tell you it would have made a huge difference for me. I'm already have a little bit of anxiety walking in on that first day. And then it's kind of like it's all downhill from there, right? So simple things like that. And one other big thing that I want to give my former employer a shout out for: have a conversation with your team. If I am the first female joining your male-dominated team, I mean, we all have safety meetings, or you can have it virtually, but why don't you have a conversation and address that shift in culture so that it isn't this, you know, I don't have to feel like I have to manage all of these personalities. Have a conversation with your team and give them an opportunity to ask some uncomfortable questions, you know, right then and there. Like, let's open the floor. We're all in the trust tree. You know, HR is blocked. What might some concerns that you guys have? And from a real life example, my former employer, one of the things the guys brought up was, well, does this mean we can't change in the shop anymore? And the manager was like, yeah, you guys are going to have to change in the change rooms now because we have a female joining the team. You know, it could be something so simple, but just have a quick conversation. It could only take 5 or 10 minutes. So little things like that, just things that I think leadership and management might overlook. Maybe they think it's no big deal, but it really is. It's a big deal. So being prepared for that new individual to be part of the team. Remember, that's the word we use, right? They want them to be part of the team. Well, that means we have to make sure that, you know, everyone is afforded those same luxuries like uniforms, PPE, and even having that conversation. It all starts with a conversation, right?
Yeah, first impressions actually matter. If I were to summarize what you said, Brandi. Maraika, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I went to is just a really strong onboarding program. And the onboarding is like the framework, like Luanne talked about, in a specific way. And then to build off of Brandi, it's making sure that onboarding takes into consideration all the different groups that are going to come through your organization. And then it's consistent, is what I would say. Like, don't give one part to one person and one part to another person. Give them all the same information so they can use that and leverage that. And then recognize later someone might need different resources to get to where they need to go. And the last that I had, again, echoing off Brandi, is this really great idea that we do exit interviews when someone leaves. Well, why don't we do onboarding interviews? So I think 2 months into someone starting, it's going there and seeking feedback. Some new eyes see new things, and they won't necessarily take your shared behaviors and say this is what it should be. They might say this is what it shouldn't be. And so having those interviews early on is really great.
That's a very great practical example, Maraika. I don't think it takes much of lift just to ask how people are, and having that interview is good. Graeme, anything to add to that one?
Yeah, a couple of things. Listen, starting a new job really is scary. Now you add your particular situation, it makes it a little more scary. We were taking one of our programs to another geographic location, and I listened to a woman who's been a journey person for 20 years. 20 years she's been a journey person, so I had a 5-year apprenticeship, and told us that still 25 years into the trade, she has to get up an hour earlier than everyone else so that she can mentally and emotionally prepare for what she's going to face that day. That was just a staggering thought to me. And Brandi has clearly emphasized that that's the norm rather than the exception for women in trades. So we talk about DEIB training as part of onboarding process. I think it's critical to train existing employees too, not just the new employees. With those small and medium contractors, you have tradespeople that have been with them for years. And if you just do it with the people you onboard, you're missing a huge, and possibly the ones that think about this least. So I think it's absolutely imperative that it continue, not just the proper orientation, but all the time sharing policies and procedures and defining what is and what is not acceptable behavior. We've developed toolboard talks for all of our contractors to use, and they can be used across any number of trades just for this reason, to ensure that the education doesn't stop with new people. And I think quite simply, retention can be attained through promoting a sense of belonging, asking them to dance, and it can be attained by demonstrating respect and trust.
Thank you, Graeme. I'm also looking at an audience question here for Brandi as well. Could Brandi describe her #1 favorite way that she stands in for underrepresented groups on a job site?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for myself personally, I just show up, but only recently in the past, I would only say the past few years have I felt comfortable enough even to speak up. I always show up and I'm there to support the individual. And I guess whether it's my age or, there is such a shortage that if I were to lose my job because I said something, I can get another job. But I speak up now. So I think we have to show up for each other. And more importantly, nowadays, we have to speak up and we have to get to that source of the problem. And like one of the other panelists mentioned, if you are in a bad place or it isn't, it's not working out for you, then it's time to make a move. I think personally, I stayed with one company for far too long. I was made to feel like I was just lucky to have a job. And I think, I don't want anyone to feel like that. So I draw from that and I really push people into a positive place. When my students are looking for work, I give them that same advice. I have people all the time that turn down a higher paying job because the employer that interviewed them, that was offering less money, made them feel better. And they made them feel like they were heard, right? And they would use their talent in a better way. There'd be room for development, et cetera, right? So personally, I show up, I speak up, and I guess that's how we start to make some change. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandi. So we heard a couple of messages. One is the reinforcement coming off over and over again, of course, and also in terms of not being a bystander as well. So if we were to address the question of the carrot versus stick itself, how does encouragement versus penalties factor into creating the right culture? Should somebody be penalized for violating the rules, or should actually being encouraged or rewarded for that? And can we make diversity, equity, and inclusion become the seat belts and bike helmets itself? Like seat belts, make it compulsory, make it actually work. Needless to say, since I bought seatbelts, of course, when seatbelts were introduced, there were objections and complaints from some people. But as the years have gone by, of course, belts have become the norm now, and of course, it's law. It's so normalized that it stands out, and when you sit in, you automatically, put your belt on. Now, is that something that we can actually do of creating that inclusive culture as well? I'll start with Graeme on this one.
The seatbelt analogy is interesting, right? When you mentioned it, Kenny, when the law first came out, you would put on a seatbelt and then the driver might have taken it personally and made a few comments. Over time, you realize that it's a health and safety issue, and your individual health and safety is far more important than making the driver feel good. So look, we talked about a balance before, right? And I think it's really important. I think the carrot's better generally, but we need to present that carrot in a way that people want to do that. DEI, unless people come forward and share their experience, it's just a story someone told us that they heard from someone else. It needs to be spoken about. We need to be open about our experiences. I talked in the last question about continuous education, and I agree. I still think that that's absolutely critical. But look at the law exists. Employers must take action once they're aware of harassment or discrimination or any type of workplace violence. The law exists. So, and what is that action? Maybe that's the issue. Maybe what you're getting at, Kenny, is should the action be harsher? The action could be a conversation. It could be discipline. It could be dismissal. There's an obligation to conduct an investigation. But does that take 5 minutes or does it take 5 days? So I think it really, I know it's a pretty hard line, but unresponsive employees should be removed from the workplace, in my view. I think that there are limits for any employee who presents constant resistance and negativity towards a diverse environment, because that can create a divisive atmosphere and, most importantly, an exclusive environment.
Thank you, Graeme. Maybe Luanne, would you want to add something into that?
Hi there. Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, like it says, we've normalized seatbelts, the analogy, right? We've normalized DEI. So people are saying, you know, we can know. So sometimes I think it can get watered down, right? Or so what we're doing with our organizations is we're embedding, we're resetting our thinking and process approach, our attitude towards why this work is a beautiful process to follow versus something we're forced to do, right? So it's a shift in perception. We can't think our way into good acting. We just have to act our way into good thinking. When we do these things, when we set in place our mission, vision, and focus around inclusivity in a respectful way, meaningful way, right? For the long term, we put in place a set of processes that are going to provide check-ins to see how we're doing. We're going to measure that progress over a period of time. I think that's critical because, as I've heard Graeme say earlier, we just don't want to check off boxes to go, you know, but we want that feedback to be continuous for improvement purposes for the long term. That's what creates this, I think, a sustainability in our thinking and process approach around meaningful inclusion. I think that's a critical piece to remember is that it just doesn't die out after a period of time, that we're doing this with new perceptions coming in, and then we're always getting a renewed, refreshed look at what we're doing around our inclusivity practices. I think that's critical because we can get complacent in that because we think the policy is set, we're forced to do this, and that we have a different idea about it. But our perceptions will shift in realizing this is really a wonderful thing that we're doing. This is a meaningful journey that we're on for the long term around diversity, right? We're going to be unified our diverse approaches and our culture within and we can celebrate that in a more meaningful way. I think that's critical.
Marika, last word to you on that question.
I would say with the seatbelt, it's time. And one thing with time is thinking about generations. And Gen Alpha is coming, and they really care about inclusivity. So we as workplaces need to start building that so we attract that generation to want to work for us. Last I'll add is just brave actions. Brandi talked about brave actions. Graeme did too. Keep taking those brave actions, which won't seem so brave in the future.
Thank you, Marika. So it looks like, of course, we are actually on time actually. So we have reached the first panel session. I know we can talk about the whole day on this particular subject itself, but I think we need to take it bite size. So that's what actually we did. So thank you to all of you in attendance, and thank you, very special thanks to our panelists as well. Brandi of Fair Trades Toolbox, Graeme from Electrical Contractors Association of Ontario, Luanne from the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business, and Marika from Maven Consulting Limited. So it has been an informative session. Thank you for your insights, of course, and we should appreciate your willingness to share your thoughts on all of these topics and your actual practical advice as well to share with the industry. So thank you. I will now turn the microphone over to our MC, Anthony, for a few comments. Anthony, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Kenny, and thank you, Kenny, for leading our panelists in an excellent conversation. I took pages and pages of notes, so thank you, job well done. And now, everyone, it is time to refresh your drinks and sharpen your pencils, as we are now on break. We will reconvene in 10 minutes for session number 2, Putting Your Culture of Inclusive Recruitment into Practice, led by Martin Limas of HRAI. See you in 10 minutes.
Can I speak to the women in charge?
¿Puedo hablar con la mujer que está a
La
cargo?
responsable.
Die Frau an der Macht.
你负责人说话吗？
That's you. You are the woman in charge. You are the force that's driving change across our industry, regardless of what your role or title is. Because this is the time to be part of shaping the future of construction. Barriers are starting to break down, and the cracks in the glass ceiling have never been larger. But there's still a long way to go. We can't afford to slow down. Positive change isn't a one-time thing. It's about recognizing just how much progress has been made, then building on top of that. And we are ready to lead the way. The moment is now.
Die Zeit ist jetzt.
现在是时候了。
J'en ai besoin maintenant.
El momento es ahora.
What does it mean to move forward? To look past how things are and see what they could be. To see opportunities where others see risk. To see change as the only constant. To work through all the challenges we face. What does it mean to move forward? It means building a future we can all be proud of. A future where so much more is possible for so many more people. So yes, let's build it safer. Yes, let's build it faster. And yes, let's build it greener. But first, we have new ground to break. So let's build something new. Let's build something now. Let's build something that changes everything.
I think we're looking at a huge labor shortage in the construction industry. We know there's a housing crisis. There's billions of dollars of work in the pipeline, and we need people to do that work.
When you're thinking about that passing of the torch and that generational gap that construction has right now,
It's really important to take the knowledge that all the baby boomers currently that are retiring have and share that down.
buildings don't erect themselves. Buildings are built by people, and it's really up to us to make sure that the young people coming into the industry are getting what they need.
Heavy Metal Summer Experience is a summer camp that we do with high school kids in the shops that teaches them about the trades.
Contractors is a social enterprise, so essentially it's two halves of a whole. On one side, we have a revenue-generating general contracting company.
And all of the revenue that they generate goes back into the program that we run here.
And this training program is designed for individuals who are at risk of homelessness to gain basic and foundational trade skills, and then link them into long-term meaningful careers in the trades.
Aspire Trade School is a 65,000 square foot trade high school, the first of its kind in North Carolina.
Capital College and Career Academy is a brand new charter high school, really where kids do a career exploration, move into paid internships, and all that's supported by dual enrollment college courses.
We have the older generation who have the wisdom, and you combine them with the younger generation who has the fire, and they are fearless.
My old school way of doing things, their new school way of doing things is such a great mix right now.
I have so much I can give back to the industry, and construction has a huge part in the future of our world.
Where do you go to school? Where do you go to church? Where do you do your grocery shopping? You can't do anything without interacting with something that was built by a craftsman.
The stuff that we do here, it goes right back into the community. We are building stuff that are going to elevate and change the world.
I think construction is positioned in one of the most amazing ways compared to any industry to be able to actually make a difference in the world.
I got my first construction job in 1988.
I've been working in construction about 42 years now.
I was in construction for 37 years.
I have only been in construction for about 2.5 years.
About 2 years now.
I've been in construction for 2 months. I can't wait. I can't wait for more.